You've started every hard conversation with the words, "Maybe I'm overreacting," even when your gut is telling you something is very wrong. You've apologized for things you're not even entirely sure you actually did, simply to make an argument stop. And somewhere along the way, you started keeping a mental record of events, just to prove to yourself that you're not losing your mind. If any of that sounds familiar, there's a real name for what might be happening to you, and it's more common than people think. It's called gaslighting, and it's a genuine, well-documented psychological pattern, not just a trendy word people throw around online. Understanding exactly how it works is often the first step toward recognizing it, both in relationships and in yourself. Today we're breaking this down in 3 parts, where the term actually comes from, the psychology of how it works, and how to recognize it. This is an educational video about recognizing a real pattern, not a guide to anything else. The goal here is entirely protective. Let's start with where this strange, oddly specific word actually came from in the first place. The word gaslighting actually comes from a 1938 stage play, later adapted into a well-known 1944 film, simply titled Gaslight. In the story, a husband slowly manipulates his wife into believing she's losing her sanity through a series of small, deliberate deceptions. One of his tactics involved the actual gas-powered lights in their home, dimming slightly whenever he secretly searched the attic upstairs. When his wife noticed the flickering lights and mentioned it, he insisted nothing had changed and that she must be imagining it. Small moment after small moment, he denied her own accurate perception of reality until she genuinely began to doubt her own mind. Psychologists eventually borrowed this story's title to describe a real pattern they were seeing show up in actual relationships. The core of gaslighting isn't really about lying. Plenty of people lie without gaslighting anyone. It's specifically about undermining someone's trust in their own perception. A gaslighter doesn't just deny a fact. They insist their version of reality is the only correct one, repeatedly, calmly, confidently. That calm confidence is actually a key part of what makes it work. Confusion combined with certainty is a genuinely powerful combination. If someone seems completely sure of a version of events that contradicts what you clearly remember, your brain has to somehow resolve that gap. Psychologist Robin Stern, who wrote extensively on this pattern, described it as a kind of ongoing psychological tug-of-war over whose reality wins. Over time, in that tug-of-war, many people start giving up their own side, simply because it feels exhausting to keep fighting for it. This rarely happens through one dramatic incident. It usually builds slowly, through dozens of small moments that each seem minor on their own. A denied comment here, a dismissed feeling there. Alone, each moment might seem forgettable. Stacked together, they quietly reshape someone's sense of reality. This is part of why gaslighting can be so difficult to identify from the inside, while it's often much more visible from the outside. Friends or family watching from a distance may notice the pattern clearly, long before the person experiencing it can see it themselves. That gap between the outside view and the inside experience is actually one of the clearest warning signs of this specific pattern. So that's the origin, a story about denying someone's accurate perception, and a real term psychologists adopted to describe an actual, common dynamic. But knowing the story doesn't fully explain why this pattern is so effective on otherwise smart, self-aware, perceptive people. For that, we actually need to look at what's genuinely happening inside the mind of the person experiencing it. Reason 2 is where this gets genuinely fascinating. The specific psychological mechanisms that make gaslighting so effective, even on sharp, capable people. The first mechanism is something we've actually covered before on this channel: cognitive dissonance, the discomfort of holding 2 conflicting beliefs at once. When someone you trust insists your memory is wrong, you're suddenly holding 2 conflicting beliefs, your own memory and their confident denial. That conflict creates real psychological discomfort, and your brain, as we've covered, is strongly motivated to resolve that discomfort quickly. Frequently, the easier path is adjusting your own belief, rather than continuing to challenge someone who seems completely, unwaveringly certain. This is the exact same mechanism behind cognitive dissonance in general, just aimed at your own memory and perception instead of a decision. The second mechanism involves trust itself. Early in a relationship, most people reasonably assume the other person is being honest with them. A gaslighter often relies heavily on that baseline trust, using it as leverage to make their version of events feel more believable. The more someone trusts the gaslighter overall, the more willing they unconsciously become to doubt their own perception instead of the gaslighters. The third mechanism connects directly to a video we made about trauma bonding, the role of unpredictable emotional cycles. Gaslighting rarely happens constantly. It's typically mixed together with periods of warmth, affection, and apparent normalcy in between. That inconsistency doesn't weaken the confusion. Based on the same reward research we've covered before, it actually deepens it. The good moments become intensely reassuring, almost proof that the confusing moments must have been misunderstandings, not real patterns. Over time, repeated denial, combined with intermittent warmth, gradually erodes a person's confidence in their own perception and memory. This erosion tends to happen gradually enough that most people don't notice it happening in real time, only in hindsight. Researchers who study this pattern describe a common progression: disbelief, then self-doubt, then a kind of chronic uncertainty about one's own reality. That chronic uncertainty is often described by people experiencing it as constantly walking on eggshells around their own thoughts and memories. It's genuinely exhausting, in a way that's hard to fully explain to someone who hasn't experienced this specific kind of doubt. Some people describe it as feeling like they're losing access to their own internal compass, the one they'd normally rely on. This is precisely why gaslighting can happen to intelligent, otherwise perceptive people. It's not about intelligence. It's about targeted, repeated psychological pressure. Nobody is naturally immune to having their trust in their own mind worn down, given enough time and enough repeated denial. Understanding these three mechanisms, cognitive dissonance, trust exploitation, and unpredictable reinforcement, helps explain why this pattern works as well as it does. It also helps explain why simply telling someone, "just trust yourself more," rarely works as advice while they're still inside the pattern. Trusting yourself is exactly the thing the pattern has been quietly, systematically undermining, often for a long time before anyone notices. Reason 3 is where this becomes genuinely useful: learning to recognize the pattern, both in your own relationships and around you. It's worth being clear here. This section describes recognizable patterns to help you notice them, not a script for using them on anyone. One common pattern is flat denial, insisting something clearly didn't happen, even when there's little real reason to doubt that it did. Another is trivializing, treating a genuine, reasonable concern as an overreaction repeatedly until the person raising it starts to doubt its validity. Another is what researchers sometimes call countering, directly questioning someone's memory of an event, even when their memory is actually accurate. Another is diverting, redirecting a conversation away from the original concern, often by questioning the person's motives instead of addressing the issue. None of these patterns, on their own, definitively prove gaslighting is happening. Context and repetition genuinely matter quite a lot here. But a consistent, repeated combination of these patterns, especially alongside genuine self-doubt building over time, is a meaningful thing to pay attention to. If you regularly find yourself apologizing for feelings you're not sure you're allowed to have, that's worth paying real attention to. If you find yourself keeping records or screenshots just to trust your own memory, that's a meaningful signal, not an overreaction. If your version of a shared memory is frequently, consistently different from someone else's and always in the same direction, notice that pattern. One genuinely helpful practice is simply writing things down as they happen, in your own words, without waiting to see how someone else responds. A written record, made in the moment, is much harder to second-guess later than a memory that gets challenged repeatedly afterward. Another genuinely helpful practice is maintaining outside perspectives, trusted friends, family, or a therapist who can offer an external, unaffected view. Isolation tends to make this pattern significantly stronger, since there's no outside reference point left to compare your experience against. Staying connected to people outside the relationship isn't unrelated to this pattern. It's actually one of the most protective things you can do. It also genuinely helps to notice when you're being pulled into debating the facts of what happened, rather than the actual feelings involved. Endless arguments over exact details are often where this pattern thrives most, since there's always some small detail left to dispute. Sometimes the healthiest response isn't winning that specific argument. It's stepping back from it entirely and trusting your own consistent pattern of experience instead. If a relationship consistently, repeatedly leaves you doubting your own mind, that consistent doubt is itself genuinely meaningful information worth taking seriously. This doesn't mean every disagreement, every differing memory, or every argument is gaslighting. Most conflict is simply normal human miscommunication. The distinction is really about pattern and intent. Does this happen occasionally and get resolved, or does it happen repeatedly and never quite resolve? If you're genuinely unsure whether what you're experiencing fits this pattern, that uncertainty itself is worth exploring with a trusted, outside professional. Therapists who specialize in this area can help sort through specific situations far more precisely than any single video ever could. The goal of understanding this pattern isn't to see it everywhere. It's to recognize it accurately when it's genuinely present. Recovery from this kind of prolonged self-doubt tends to happen gradually, often by slowly rebuilding trust in your own perception, one instance at a time. Every time your independently verified memory turns out to be accurate, that's real evidence rebuilding the exact trust that was worn down. That rebuilding process takes real time, especially after a long period of consistent doubt, but the research on recovery is genuinely encouraging. People generally can, and consistently do, rebuild a stable, confident relationship with their own perception and memory after this kind of experience. So here's what gaslighting genuinely is, once you strip away the casual, overused internet buzzword version of it. It's a real, gradual psychological pattern where someone's confident, repeated denial slowly erodes another person's trust in their own memory and perception. It works through genuine cognitive dissonance, borrowed trust, and unpredictable emotional cycles, not through any single dramatic moment. You can spot it through recognizable patterns: denial, trivializing, countering, diverting, repeated consistently over time, not through any one isolated incident. And rebuilding trust in your own mind afterward is genuinely possible through outside perspective, written records, and simply enough time. If any part of this felt uncomfortably familiar to you, that discomfort is genuinely worth paying attention to, not dismissing. Talk to someone you trust or a professional and trust the consistent pattern of your own experience over any single confident denial. If this helped you understand a pattern more clearly, there's more psychology like this coming soon. Subscribe, and I'll see you next time.